Andy McCarthy joins us. He's a Fox News contributor, columnist for National Review, and former assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of New York, the ever so prestigious Southern District, and, by the way, was involved in high-profile cases like the Blind Shake and others. How are you?
Sean, how you doing? I'm doing great.
Okay, so, the Attorney General did everything right from what I can see. He gave Robert Mueller an opportunity to see the March 24th letter and make any changes he wanted. When they dropped this the night before the hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee, this letter of Mueller's is leaked. I'm not even sure Mueller wrote the letter, to be honest. I wonder if it's Andrew Weissman, but that's speculation on my part. And then when subsequent phone calls happened, Mueller complaining about the initial report, Barr got on the phone and said, well, no, there's nothing substantively that he disagreed with at all. He didn't mischaracterize what was in the report, and he was just unhappy with the media coverage of it. And, of course, Barr had already agreed to release the entire thing publicly.
Well, that's right, Sean. I think what happened here is the report, Barr's letter outlining Mueller's conclusions went out on March 24th, and what people were very surprised by, as Barr testified that he had been surprised by when he first talked to Mueller, was that Mueller didn't do the one thing he was arguably needed to do, which was to resolve the obstruction question. So after 2 years of fawning publicity, he finally, for the first time, was catching a lot of heat, and he was catching a lot of darts, and he was getting a lot of criticism. And I think the people on his staff who are probably still angry that he would not charge obstruction on the basis of this, I think, untenable legal theory that they were investigating under for 2 years, got very angry at the negative press coverage. And I think Mueller himself got irked enough about the negative press coverage that he was willing to sign a letter that like you, I think the staff wrote. And this was all a reaction to the negative press coverage. But I would want to just add one thing about this, Sean. As Attorney General Barr said in his testimony, what happens under the regulations is the special counsel does a report, which is supposed to be a confidential report that gets turned into the Attorney General, and then the special counsel is finished, and it's up to the Attorney General to decide how much and what parts of the report go out. So what I don't understand is if Mueller didn't do the one job that he was brought in to do, namely resolve this case, who is he to be telling anybody else how to do their job? It was up to the Attorney General to decide how this went out, and if it went out at all, because no one was entitled to get this report.
We can't put enough emphasis on this. There was no legal obligation at all for the Attorney General to give any of the Mueller report out. From what I understand, after we got rid of the Independent Counsel Act, after the Clinton impeachment, and by the way, people like Jerry Nadler did not want the Starr report out that had 11 specific felonies committed by Bill Clinton at the time, and they were labeled and they were listed for everybody to see. Great big distinction and difference. They decided they'd move forward with the special counsel and put the powers in the hands of the Attorney General, and the Attorney General had an obligation to make a decision here based on the findings of Mueller. But even the so-called Big Ten findings, I'm saying, okay, so Donald Trump, he was very outspoken about his innocence regarding Russia collusion. Mueller ended up agreeing with him. That's the fourth investigation that corroborated such. You have the FBI 9-month investigation. You have the House Intel Committee investigation. You have the bipartisan Senate Committee investigation. And now the Mueller report itself says no coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia as it relates to attempts by Russia to disrupt or influence or create chaos in our 2016 election. So the underlying crime is dead. And as it relates to him saying publicly, maybe I should fire this one or that one, and not doing it when he had the power even under Article 2 to do it legally, I don't see any possibility you can ever get to obstruction.
I don't think so either, Sean, and I've never thought so. The only way that they were able to sustain this investigation is by a very novel theory of obstruction, which is that if a prosecutor decides after the fact that any act of the president, including the exercise of his Article 2 discretion, such as, firing subordinate executive officials or weighing in on whether somebody should be prosecuted or issuing a pardon, all the things the president has the power to do, if a prosecutor, an inferior executive officer, later on decides to second-guess the chief executive and decides that the action was improperly motivated, that can be reached by a federal prosecutor through an indictment. And I just think that's always been an absurd legal theory. And that doesn't mean, I always get this when I say this, Sean, I'm not saying the president's above the law. I don't think anybody's saying that. What I'm saying is, in this system as it was designed by the framers, the main check on alleged presidential abuse of power is Congress and the ability to impeach. So if Congress thinks the president has abused his powers, then yes, Congress can impeach the president. But it's not for a federal prosecutor who is an inferior executive officer to second-guess the president's legitimate exercise of his constitutional authority, which is why Attorney General Barr has said from the beginning, no one is saying that a president can never be cited for obstruction of justice, but if you're going to do it, it's got to be traditional obstruction of justice, things like destroying evidence in a criminal investigation. You can't get the president on obstruction of justice for firing the FBI director.
You can't. And number one, if you don't believe Andy McCarthy, who knows the law as well as anybody, and, just listen to James Comey himself. He could be fired for any reason at all or no reason whatsoever. He knows, and you knew he served at the pleasure of the president. All right, quick break. All right, as we continue with former assistant attorney for the Southern District of New York, Andy McCarthy is with us. How much trouble do you think Jim Comey is, starting with him leaking information, as we now know, to create the atmosphere where a special counsel would be created? That was his goal, but that was government information he was leaking out. Number two, the fact that he signed the first FISA warrant, and we now know it's an unverifiable dossier, which was the bulk of information for that. It also excluded, I think, the very important information to the FISA court judge in that first FISA warrant, which is that Hillary Clinton bought and paid for it, and they didn't tell the judge, the FISA judge in the application, everything they needed to tell them, and they clearly committed a fraud on the court. What would the penalty be for that? What would the charge be for that?
Well, I don't think there'd be a criminal charge against the director of the FBI coming out of the FISA warrant. I think, I actually don't anticipate criminal charges. And in a lot of ways, Sean, I think that if criminal charges are the price tag to getting to the bottom of this, then we're never going to get to the bottom of this. I think the most important thing is that we find out what happened here. And if it turns out people violated the law, then then that's on them, and they got to. Do
you have any doubt? Let me run through the list that Hillary Clinton had a rigged investigation into her email server scandal. If she had top secret classified information on that server, isn't that a violation of 18 U.S.C. 793, a clear violation?
Yeah, Sean, I spent 3 years saying that. Yes.
Do you believe that that when she deleted subpoenaed emails, had people do it for her, used bleach bit to acid wash the hard drive, beat up devices with hammers, remove SIM cards, do you believe that the intent was to destroy evidence for the underlying crime and obstruct justice?
I do believe that her intent was corrupt, yes.
Do you believe a prosecutor or a normal prosecutor would find that as something that is a chargeable offense?
Yeah, the reason I hesitated on your last question, Sean, is I've always thought that Mrs. Clinton's motive was to conceal the degree to which the State Department was put in the service of the Clinton Foundation when she was at the State Department.
But there was an intent to avoid, to destroy evidence?
Yeah, I think there was an intent to destroy government records, which you're not allowed to do. And besides obstruction of justice, it's a crime in and of itself, standing alone, to destroy government records, regardless of whether they're connected to a judicial proceeding.
All right, and you also believe that FISA, there was likely a fraud committed on the court?
Yes, I do believe there was a fraud committed on the court with the FISA.
All right. Andy McCarthy, National Review Online. Always great to hear from you, Andy. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Sean.